Hi, my name is Ben Welch, and I want to introduce you to Gordy Scarborough. A lot of you have heard of Gordy Scarborough, haven't had a chance to meet him. Gordy, you and I have known each other
since 74.
Since 1974, so 40-some years, right?
Exactly.
40, well, I don't know how many it is, well over 40. But Gordy has some really interesting stories. Gordy, my brother-in-law worked for you.
He did. He was a body man in our truck body shop.
Okay. And I can remember Larry telling me, hey, my boss has some over-the-road trucks, got a mechanic shop. At that time, basically all Conklin had was lubricants. And he said, you ought to go down and talk to Gordy. So you remember the first time I came to see you?
I do.
I remember my first impressions. Gordy you hadn't been talking very long. And I thought to myself, here is one nice guy. Really, I don't know if I've ever told you that or not. I guess I haven't.
No, but I appreciate it.
But that was my first introduction to Gordy. And at the time you had, well, tell the story.
Well, we had 5 trucks, 3 running locally, 2 long distance over the road. And we'd been using some Winds products. We thought Winds was pretty good additive. At that time, I'd never heard of Conklin.
Okay.
And you came in and said, I should try your products. And I'll never forget the part. You told me how good they were, and I kind of believed you because you were quite believable. But you made me an offer nobody else had. Any times the salesman had come before,
okay,
he'd always say, you use my products. If they don't work, I'll give you your money back. And you told me that. But you also said, if they do work, you got to promise to buy more. And I thought, you know, no salesman's ever told me that before. I was kind of impressed by that. So we tried them, and they worked, and we bought more, and I guess the rest is history.
The rest is history. And Gordy was a real leader in our lube products. And I remember the first time you tried the product, you tried 5 gallons. At that time, we had just Fuel Mate for a fuel conditioner, 5 gallons of TKO, the oil conditioner. And
Gear Glide.
And Gear Glide, the gear product at that time. And I think you had 2 over-the-road trucks ran the same route all the time.
We did. We had 2 73 Max that we bought the year before.
Okay.
We had them both leased to Chief, hauling steel buildings wherever throughout the United States. And so what we did at that time, we put the Conklin products in one truck all the way through. Fuel Mate, TKO, Gear Glide in the transmissions and rear ends. And then I called the dispatcher for Chief and asked him to run our trucks together, one behind the other. That way the speeds, road conditions, temperatures, and all would be similar, and we wanted to do that for at least a month for a test. And that's how we tested them, one against the other. Chief kept track of our fuel mileage very accurately, so we were able to compare that. And it's been quite a while, Ben, but as I recall, we had we went from 4.3 to 4.8 miles per gallon on the treated truck, above what the untreated truck did. And a month later or 2, we treated the other truck, and the results were similar. So 4.3 to 4.8 is 9%, something like that.
Yeah, well, as I recall, it was 12% what it figured out.
Okay,
increase
okay.
in mileage. And your driver that was driving the one non-treated on the transmission, you remember he...
oh, I remember that
you hadn't
deal.
told him, right?
He come back at the trip after we treated the second truck, and we didn't tell him we treated it. And the truck had quite a few miles on at that point, someone over a year old. It had something over 100,000. And he made the remark that the transmission must finally be breaking in because he could shift it so much easier. It was a 13-speed Road Ranger. And I said, you probably noticed the temperatures on the gearboxes was getting cooler. And he says, well, yes, they were. And then I told him what we'd done. We had treated the truck with that time called Gear Glide, and it made the difference. The RPM was idling at 600, and then it idled at 650, and we didn't change the pump. The list goes on, you know.
It goes on, and we could be here all day talking about stories, things that you've told me on our lubricants. But here, just a week or so ago, Gordy and I haven't seen each other for a long time. But just a week or so ago, you were telling me about one of your diesel, was it a diesel pickup that Fred had run?
Oh, that was a
a
1-ton Ford, and we had rebuilt a year or two before a real hot 460 gas engine to put in it because we pulled the trailer with it.
Okay.
And yes, it happened to be my son Fred. He went to Lincoln after a load of product that day, and he had a date that night. And on the way home, I don't remember what happened. The thermostat stuck, hose broke or something, but he drove it on home, and it got very, very hot. And he knew better, but that's another story. But in any event, it didn't run well the next day, so we tore it down. We pulled the heads off, and that engine had got so hot the valve springs were beginning to collapse. The valve springs were actually losing enough tension to where I'm surprised the keepers didn't fall out. It got that hot. So we completely...
You said there was actual play?
There was play between the valve spring and the cap.
Okay.
You could move the valve spring loosely up and down. The valves weren't closing all the way even. And so we completely rebuilt the heads, of course, with new valves, seats, springs, the whole bit. But the cylinders looked fine, so we put the heads back on, and it ran fine. With that hot, with the convoy oil, it didn't hurt the bearings, or it didn't hurt the cylinder walls.
Yep.
In fact, now that we're talking about convoy, that came out in 1978. And we'd been running equipment for quite some years before that. But
and incidentally, just so people know, Gordy, he was trained originally as a diesel mechanic?
I was a diesel mechanic for 20 years.
Okay.
Before I got in the roofing business. I made my living overhauling earth moving equipment and semi-trucks.
Okay.
So that was kind of my main thing back in those years. And then over the years we had a number of one diesel engine, and we had a number of hot gas engines, and we had many small engines on our roofing equipment, clear down to 18 horse and 16 horse rigs and 5 horse rigs. And from 1978 till today, and today I'm down to 1 pickup and 1 car, but all I've ever bought since 78 is 10W30 Convoy. And I've used that in the entire fleet, from the biggest diesel to the little 5 horse rigs, and I've never had a bearing failure. Yeah. Now that's from 1978 until be 40 years next year.
I had a mechanic, in fact, my friend and mechanic over in Lincoln, Randy Bloom, was telling me just last week, I went in to have my oil. I change my oil once every 10,000 miles. Don't do anything, and I have him change the oil in the filter, grease it at 10,000 miles, right? And he told me the other day, he said, Ben, there is definitely something different about convoy oil and the rest of the Conklin products. You can't see it on camera, but my Suburban's parked right over there. All originals just turned over 910,000 miles. So is there something different? Yes, there is something different. And you got to share one more story. You were talking, I remember one time you had, I don't know if it was an oil line break or something on one of your trucks.
It was an oil line that, and I forget which one it was too, but it carried the oil to the turbocharger. And the turbochargers turned extremely fast.
How many RPMs?
Oh, I think it's around, I don't remember exactly. Many thousands of RPMs. Faster by far than you would think. 30,000, 40,000 RPM, something like that. They turn over very fast, and they carry a heavy film of oil. And in this particular case, the turbo run low on oil pressure for a period of time, and it had no damage.
No damage even to the turbo. Now, Gordy told me that story years ago. I didn't quite understand it, but we had lunch together just now, and Gordy was explaining that a turbo, like I said, it runs on a film of oil.
Because it turns so fast, the oil clearance around the shaft is only like 5/8 of an inch diameter.
Okay.
But the oil clearance is enough to where you can actually rattle the shaft in the bushing, because they carry a real thick film of oil around it to accommodate and lubricate it at that high speed. When they're dry, you think they're wore out. That's how loose the shaft is in the bushings, but that's the way they have to be.
Okay.
They actually need oil pressure
You guys that happen to be mechanics, which you've forgotten more about mechanics than I'll ever know, Gordy.
It's been a long time since I've been involved.
But I didn't understand how critical it was that a turbo always have oil to it, but that explains why.
Yes.
And Gordy I remember you telling me way back when, normally if a turbo loses oil pressure, that shaft is gone immediately.
Yes. At that speed, without oil, the shaft would eat into it's just a brass bushing.
Okay.
Very quickly. You know, it's they're designed to where the shaft never touches the bushing, ever.
Okay.
There's always a fairly thick film of oil surrounding it.
And our products, Kerry Conklin developed the polar molecule, and that oil actually attaches itself into the metal itself. So you always have a lubricated surface.
Oh yes.
Gordy, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the Conklin business and what it's done for you. You were mentioning something like that when we talked a week ago. Can you expand on that just a bit?
Well, as I was sharing with you that day, I've been in the business now since spring of '74, and had been in the heavy equipment business and the trucking business for 20 years prior, give or take. And that's a pretty good business, but as it turns out, it's a pretty negative business, as the way people function, interact, and think, and talk to each other. It's quite negative, and I didn't realize that until I got affiliated with the Conklin Company and began attending some meetings and associated with other Conklin people. And it was obvious to me there was another way of thinking out there that was far more positive than the one I'd been exposed to. And every time I'd take in another meeting or so, it became more apparent. And then in the late summer of '78, Charlie Herbster asked me if I'd accompany him on a little 3-month trip around the United States, and we'd do some rah-rah for Conklin Company. And I said, of course, I'd be glad to do that. I was single at the time, so I didn't have to go home and ask first. And so it was sometime in October that we left Shakopee, Minnesota, and we had a motorhome that the Conklin Company had been built by John Dodgen over in Iowa. He built what they called the Born-Free motorhomes on 1-ton Ford chassis, and they built it up into a nice, pretty thing we called the Conklin Air that had pretty colors and Conklin painted on it, and we drove that.
Okay.
We drove that to about 42 states, and we all around the country. We put on 150 some meetings in that many cities or more, and each meeting was a rah-rah meeting. And we talked for a couple hours all about how good the Conklin business was and what it had done for us. And what with my 40-some years association with the Conklin people, and that 3 months with Charlie, day and night, where every hour was rah-rah and positive, it really changed my way of thinking, seriously.
Yeah.
To where I reached the point when we got home, and even today, if I see a negative coming, I dodge it. I just don't want to be part of a negative whatever. And it's just that simple, you know?
We have the ability to choose the way we want to think, right?
Exactly.
And a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't realize that.
I didn't know that until I was affiliated with Bob Conklin for a few years.
Yep.
And I found out that the Conklin Company had 3 principles that are never broken, and one of them is that there's never any alcohol served at any Conklin function, and that Conklin money is never paid for a dime of alcohol, which fits in real well with my way of thinking. The other one is that there's never any off-colored stories at a Conklin get-together. It's a family company. And the third one is there's never a meeting past Saturday noon, because from Saturday noon you can get anywhere in the country to go to church Sunday morning.
Okay.
And those 3 principles have been sound and fast, that Bob set them up, and Charlie and Judy, God rest her soul, they've maintained those principles.
Yep. Sometimes we get so heavy in products, and we could be here all afternoon talking about incredible stories on our products, but really it goes a lot deeper, as you just talked about, Gordy. It's much more than just products.
It is.
It's way, and I know the last few years, especially financially, has been very good for Gordy. It can be for anybody that gets in our business and just exposes the products, exposes the business. So again, Gordy, any final comments?
Yeah.
What do we leave out?
It becomes a way of life.
It does become a way of life. Thanks so much,
Thank
Gordy.
you.